Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the ABC Cafe, a digital meeting space where we discuss art, books, and culture. I'm so glad you decided to drop in today. Now, we are going to be doing a deep dive into one of my favorites, and I think one of the most dramatic paintings from art history, John Singleton Copley's Watson and the Shark. So pull up a cup and let's dive into the story behind this real life event. Now, some of you might be wondering, is this just an excuse for me to talk about my undying passion for sharks? And the answer is probably. But there is so much more to unpack and appreciate in this work of art. So, we are going to dive into 5 different keys that can get us into the larger story behind this incredibly dramatic painting. So, starting at the bottom where the action is and working our way up to the top of this painting, we're going to ask 5 key questions. What is happening here? Where are Watson's clothes? Why does the shark look so weird? What heightens this scene's intense drama? And finally, who is Watson's mysterious rescuer? Painted in 1778, this work actually shows a real event that had happened a few decades prior in 1749 to then 14-year-old cabin boy Brooke Watson as he was sailing in the Havana harbor. So somehow poor Watson ends up overboard off the coast of Cuba in this harbor, and his shipmates desperately try and get him back in the boat. But before they can, he ends up losing his right foot and the bottom of his leg to a shark attack. And this is the moment that John Singleton Copley has caught so masterfully in this painting. All right, so let's get into the action of this painting. We're going to look at the bottom register here. Clearly, your eye is supposed to go to the shark's gaping mouth and poor Watson's terrified face first. We can see that his outstretched pose is reaching towards the shark, creating a sort of bridge between the two figures. Now, this kind of pose reminds us of Renaissance nudes, of young boys who are depicted as angels, the young King David, perhaps. And this kind of pose, especially in a nude figure, is supposed to show off the painter's skill in capturing an anatomically correct body and male musculature, which was very popular in history and religious paintings. Now, Watson is not wearing any clothes. Historical accounts tell us that Watson was swimming in the harbor, so he likely undressed, but his nudity also serves an art historical purpose. Now, this brings up the idea of a figure being naked versus nude in art history. A naked figure is applied to images that are supposed to be humbled or in a state of humiliation or shame, but nudes are heroic. Their muscles and well formed bodies are supposed to remind us of Greek and Roman heroes like Hercules and Apollo. So, to be nude is to be very dignified in your own natural body. Now, in the lower left corner of the painting, we can actually see Watson's already missing his foot. Copley hasn't made this too gruesome, but he does suggest the shark bite and this missing foot with some red paint in the blue green water. As we can see, Watson's right knee sort of disappears in that color. His arm again is reaching out for help, arching towards the shark and marking the center of this composition. His beautiful golden hair is fanning out in the water, again, really reminiscent of these Renaissance angels who were always depicted as these very fair skinned, blonde, beautiful young males. Now, the shark's open mouth next to him and the rows of teeth are obviously meant to inspire fear and the terror that Watson is feeling in this moment. And its size also gives us a sense of its immense power coming right up out of the water to attack Watson. And just looking at the bottom of the painting here, the situation seems pretty hopeless for Watson. Now, the shark, the closer you look at it, probably looks a bit off to you, especially its bright pink gums and how they're outlined. Something just looks anatomically off about the way the mouth is situated.
Now, while Copley has tried to faithfully depict a tiger shark, which is the shark that attacked Watson, we can see that the eyes are done pretty faithfully in terms of the small pupil, the amber iris, even some of the whites of the eyes are visible, or the sclera around the iris, which all tracks for a tiger shark. But the tiger shark has a nictitating membrane, or third eyelid, that comes down to protect the eye during attacks or investigations, and that has not been captured here, possibly because Copley didn't know it existed. Of course, study of sharks was in its infancy during this time. So we see the eye is a little off because of that. It looks very clear and almost mammalian, which we would not expect to see during a frenzied shark attack. Now, the nose is quite large. This nose is very massive when we look at what tiger sharks actually appear to be, and their noses are much more slender, so that creates a sense of bulkiness or strangeness to this shark in the painting.
So, moving up into the middle register of the painting, where all of the sailors are in this boat, we can see a big theme of this painting and others like it that will come later, which is man versus nature and its terrors, and what emotional reactions different human beings will have when faced with something terrible and grotesque. So all of these sailors are individuals, and they each have an individual reaction to the situation. Some have a look of concern or fear or even desperation. The two men who are reaching out to Watson are desperate to get to him. Clearly, their body language is showing us that. The older man on the left seems more determined, like he's concentrating on reaching Watson, while the younger man beside him seems a little more doubtful. He's not quite sure they will be able to save Watson. We can see these in the expression of their eyes, especially. So we see the other men in the boat are also worried. Some are in awe of the shark, seeming to really look at it in surprise and fear. And we also see the man on the far right. He is quite apathetic in the face of this terrible event. He really has no opinion, cannot be bothered to be concerned. And this is quite an important inclusion that the artist has chosen because not everyone has the same reactions and emotions to the same events, right? Some people, in the face of something terrifying, will not have a reaction, and maybe this is their personal makeup, or maybe they've seen far too much tragedy to still feel it as deeply as someone like the young cabin boy. All right, so now we've reached the top of the painting, the top of the pyramid that these bodies form in the middle of the canvas. And we see two heroes, two rescuers who are completing this pyramidal structure, a white man and a black man. The white man raises a fish hook to stab into the shark, and his pose is very reminiscent of St. George slaying the dragon, an image that would be very familiar to British subjects who were Copley's audience at this time. St. George is the patron saint of England, among other countries. He was a Roman soldier who converted to Christianity and was ultimately killed or martyred for his Christian faith around 300 AD, and many images of him show him stabbing a spear into a dragon, which represents sin or evil in different stories. So the figure here is deliberately calling to mind this idea of a righteous man killing an evil creature. But it's really the second man who raises more questions, especially when we think about the time period that this painting was done in. Now, the black man is presumably from Africa. He's come to Cuba either as, unfortunately, part of the transatlantic slave trade, or perhaps he is a free man who lives in this port, or is a fisherman or a sailor on another ship. We're not entirely sure based on the painting's context. We do see that in Copley's original drawing for this painting, this figure was also a white man. So Copley made the direct decision to include an African man in this painting, and not only include him, but make him one of the heroes of this painting. If we see the African man's hands, he is holding the rope that will eventually tow Watson to safety inside the boat. So we see in one hand, this man has the life saving rope that will pull Watson to safety, and his other hand is outstretched, and it beautifully mirrors Watson's outstretched hand in the water. So both of them are really framing the center of this composition, and both of them are equally important to this composition, which is a bold political statement for the artist to be making at this time when sadly it was very common for African people to not be depicted in paintings at all, or if they were in places of subordination. They were there more as objects than people, let alone heroic people. So this is a very bold political statement that Copley is making simply by putting this figure into this heroic position, which is very interesting. Now, ironically and sadly, Watson, Brooke Watson, the boy who goes on to be rescued after the attack depicted here, would grow up to make his fortune in the slave trade and speak out in British Parliament against the abolition of the slave trade. As Alicia Page, who is writing for the National Gallery of Art, aptly says, quote, "This painting depicts the humanity of a black sailor helping to save someone who, if their roles were reversed, may not have reached out to save him." So there you have it. Those are 5 keys to take a deep dive into Watson and the Shark. Thank you so much for joining me here at the ABC Cafe. Please like and subscribe for more content. I would love to help you bring to life your own arts and culture stories. I've worked with dozens of authors and museums around the country to bring their stories to life, and I can't wait to see what I could help you with as well. Thank you so much for joining, and tune in next time. Bye!